There are moments when thinking deeply feels more like a burden than a gift. Have you ever shared an idea only to be met with blank stares or awkward silence? Or perhaps you've questioned something everyone else accepts, only to find yourself ignored or even resented. This isn't just your imagination. Throughout history, society has often resisted those who see beyond the surface, not because deep thinkers are wrong, but because they reveal truths others would rather not face. Whether it was Leonardo da Vinci challenging conventional science, Virginia Woolf redefining literature, or Srinivasa Ramanujan seeing mathematical patterns others missed, those who think differently have frequently been misunderstood or even cast aside. Arthur Schopenhauer once suggested that intelligence can feel like a curse rather than a gift, isolating those who see too much and question too deeply. But why does this happen? Why do those who push the boundaries of knowledge and perception often find themselves on the outside looking in? The answer lies not in intelligence itself, but in how people respond to it. Society does not reject deep thinkers because they lack value. It does so because they expose what others prefer to keep hidden. This resistance is deeply rooted in human psychology. Consider how we react to different kinds of superiority. When we see someone who is exceptionally athletic, we admire their skill. If we meet someone who is wealthy, we might envy them, but we rarely take it personally. But intelligence is different. Psychologists call this the mirror effect. When faced with someone whose thoughts surpass our own, we don't just recognize their intellect, we also become painfully aware of our own limitations. This makes people uncomfortable, often without them realizing it. Deep thinkers do not merely introduce new ideas, they challenge the beliefs people have built their identities around, and human nature does not easily forgive such challenges. Unlike physical strength or financial success, intelligence directly affects how people see themselves. Our thoughts shape our identity, and when those thoughts are questioned, it can feel like an attack on our very existence. This is why, in social settings, deep conversations are often met with resistance. If you've ever tried to discuss an insightful idea only for people to change the subject, it's not necessarily because they don't understand, it's often because they don't want to. The mind craves familiarity, and deep thinking disrupts that. Rather than embracing complexity, many people instinctively reject it, preferring the safety of simplicity over the discomfort of growth. This is why, throughout history, intellectuals, visionaries, and philosophers have often been pushed to the edges of society. Their ideas don't just challenge the way the world works, they challenge how people see themselves. Yet, despite this resistance, deep thinkers are essential. From Galileo to Ada Lovelace, from Socrates to Rachel Carson, those who question the norm are the ones who push humanity forward. Ironically, while they are often ignored or ridiculed in their time, their ideas shape the future. Even today, in a world that values confidence more than depth, those who think deeply may struggle to find acceptance. People are drawn to simple, comforting messages rather than complex truths. This is why charismatic figures with easy answers often gain widespread influence, while those who encourage deep thought remain in the background. However, this should not discourage those who see the world differently. True understanding is rarely recognized immediately, but that does not make it any less valuable. If you have ever felt isolated because of your thoughts, remember, history was shaped by those who refused to stop questioning. The world may resist deep thinkers, but it also depends on them to evolve. The deeper someone searches for truth, the more they drift from the majority. This is not just an observation, it's a paradox built into human nature. Intelligence does more than challenge existing beliefs. It disrupts the harmony that society clings to for stability. But is there real evidence that intelligence is perceived as a threat? Modern neuroscience suggests there is. Studies have shown that when people feel intellectually inferior, the brain's amygdala, the same region that processes fear, activates as if responding to physical danger. This means intelligence is not just intimidating in a figurative sense, it triggers the same survival responses as an immediate threat. But why does a sharp mind activate a fear response designed for life-threatening situations? The answer lies in our evolutionary past. Thousands of years ago, intelligence was secondary to survival. Thriving depended on group cohesion, not individual brilliance. Early human societies valued those who could contribute to the tribe, not those who stood apart with abstract thoughts. A person who challenged the group's shared reality risked being cast out, and in the wild, isolation meant death. This ancient wiring remains in our brains today. Highly intelligent individuals often challenge norms, disrupt group consensus, and introduce ideas that force others to think critically, something the average brain instinctively resists. This is why intelligence is often met with suspicion rather than admiration. The fear is not of intelligence itself, but of the disruption it causes to the collective mind. This also explains why many deep thinkers feel socially disconnected. Their intelligence is not a handicap, but it sets them apart in a world that prizes belonging over brilliance. A 2021 study at Stanford University revealed something even more startling. How people perceive intelligence depends on context. In one-on-one conversations, intelligence is often respected, even admired. But in group settings, the dynamic shifts dramatically. When intelligence enters a group, it disrupts the delicate balance of social status. People don't just react to intelligence, they react to how intelligence affects their standing in the group. If someone feels overshadowed by a deep thinker, their natural instinct is to either downplay that intelligence or distance themselves from it. This explains why intellectuals often find meaningful discussions in private, but struggle to engage in larger social circles. The discomfort others feel isn't personal, it's a subconscious response designed to preserve group cohesion. Cognitive biases further reinforce this resistance to intelligence. One example is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where those with limited knowledge overestimate their competence, while highly intelligent individuals tend to underestimate theirs. This creates a frustrating divide. Those who know the least are often the most confident, dismissing those who see the full complexity of an issue. Another key bias is the status quo effect, the tendency to favor familiar ideas over new, unsettling truths. Intelligence often presents disruptive concepts, forcing people to confront uncomfortable realities. Lastly, there's the backfire effect. When people are presented with information that contradicts their beliefs, instead of reconsidering, they become even more entrenched. This is why intellectual debates rarely change minds instantly. People resist altering their worldview, even when presented with undeniable facts. The digital age has amplified this rejection of intelligence. Social media rewards quick, engaging content over deep, reflective discussions. Algorithms prioritize what captures attention, not what expands minds. As a result, viral content is often simplistic, emotionally charged, and designed for immediate reaction rather than thoughtful analysis. A philosopher explaining a complex idea in a nuanced way will always struggle to compete with a dramatic headline or a sensationalized post. This shift means that modern society is increasingly shaped by entertainment rather than enlightenment. The deeper someone thinks, the harder it becomes to condense those thoughts into bite-sized content, leading to fewer people engaging with truly profound ideas. Instead of rewarding depth, society gravitates toward what is easy to digest, leaving deep thinkers feeling unheard and undervalued. So what does this mean for those who seek knowledge? The rejection of intelligence is not just a social challenge, it is a deeply embedded psychological and cultural phenomenon. It is wired into human instincts, reinforced by group dynamics, and amplified by technology. But this does not mean intelligence has no place in society. Rather, it means that intellectuals must navigate these barriers with awareness. Instead of expecting universal acceptance, they must find the right audiences, choose their battles wisely, and adapt their message without diluting its depth. True wisdom lies not just in understanding reality, but in learning how to communicate it effectively. If intelligence is met with resistance, what does society truly embrace? The answer is comfort, predictability over truth, familiarity over challenge. Arthur Schopenhauer once argued that intelligence is not a blessing but a burden. Unlike those who view knowledge as the path to success, he believed the more one understands, the harder it is to connect with the world. The question is, why? What makes intelligence feel more isolating than empowering? The answer is not just intellectual, it is emotional, social, and deeply human. Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy centered on what he called the will, a relentless, unconscious force that drives human existence. He argued that most people are governed by a primal will to survive and seek comfort, often prioritizing pleasure, security, and social validation. However, those with profound intellect function differently. Instead of following instincts blindly, they develop an unquenchable thirst for truth, a relentless pursuit of understanding that overrides the need for superficial satisfaction. While the average person seeks distractions in entertainment, relationships, and routine pleasures, deep thinkers question the very foundation of these pursuits. Their search for meaning often isolates them, as they struggle to connect with a world that prioritizes temporary pleasure over profound understanding. This gap between deep thinkers and the majority creates an inevitable disconnection. Where most find fulfillment in what society offers, intellectual minds see it as an illusion, a veil hiding deeper existential truths. Schopenhauer believed that increased awareness makes it difficult to relate to the masses. A person who sees through falsehoods, whether in societal norms, social interactions, or cultural expectations, finds it exhausting to engage in them. Everyday conversations are often built on small talk, status games, and unspoken social contracts. For someone who values truth above convenience, participating in this feels inauthentic. While most people thrive in surface-level exchanges, intellectuals long for meaningful discussions, philosophical inquiries, and intellectual stimulation. This difference creates a tension between deep thinkers and society. The former desires depth, while the latter embraces simplicity. The more an individual understands human nature, the more apparent the contradictions and absurdities of social norms become. This awareness makes it difficult to find joy in the things that most people cherish. What is seen as ambition by many, a high-paying job, an impressive social status, or even a perfect relationship, is often questioned by deep thinkers, who wonder whether these pursuits have any real meaning beyond temporary satisfaction. To Schopenhauer, most human desires are illusions, constantly shifting and never truly leading to lasting fulfillment. He believes that people chase power, wealth, and admiration because they assume these things will bring happiness. However, the pursuit itself creates a cycle of endless longing. Once one goal is reached, another quickly replaces it. Highly intelligent individuals often recognize this pattern early on, making them less susceptible to the illusions that drive society. While others work tirelessly for material success or social validation, deep thinkers may find themselves detached from these ambitions, not because they lack motivation, but because they see through the fleeting nature of human desires. This detachment often leads to misunderstandings. Society interprets their lack of enthusiasm for common pursuits as arrogance, laziness, or even cynicism. In reality, they are simply uninterested in illusions that others mistake for meaning. This fundamental difference in perspective can make them feel alienated, not because they choose to be outsiders, but because their worldview naturally separates them from the mainstream. Schopenhauer compared intelligence to heightened sensitivity, an ability to perceive reality with sharper clarity, which often feels more like a burden than a gift. He famously wrote, "A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial, because with knowledge comes the inability to ignore the world's contradictions. The more deeply one understands life, the harder it becomes to engage in its distractions." He believed that intelligence and happiness were inversely related. Ignorance allows people to find joy in simple things, while wisdom exposes the suffering that underlies existence. This explains why some of history's greatest thinkers, such as Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche, wrestled with deep existential dilemmas that kept them isolated. Schopenhauer suggested that intelligence does not create loneliness directly, but rather makes it inevitable by revealing truths that most people are unwilling to face. When someone sees beyond the illusions that society thrives on, they become difficult to relate to, and their presence alone can make others uncomfortable. This is not because they impose their views on others, but because their understanding forces people to confront unsettling questions about their own existence. Despite his bleak outlook, Schopenhauer did not leave deep thinkers without guidance. Instead of viewing solitude as a curse, he saw it as an opportunity. He believed that highly intelligent individuals should embrace their isolation and use it for intellectual, creative, and philosophical exploration. Rather than seeking validation from a world that does not understand them, he encouraged deep thinkers to find fulfillment in their own pursuits, whether through writing, art, or philosophical contemplation. He also advised them to seek out like-minded individuals, those who share their depth of thought, through books, private discussions, or intellectual communities. Engaging in deep conversations with those who appreciate truth can be far more rewarding than attempting to fit into a society that values appearances over substance. Additionally, he warned against indiscriminately sharing profound insights with those who are not ready to hear them. Not everyone is prepared to confront unsettling truths, and attempting to force such awareness can lead to rejection. Instead, he advised intellectuals to observe, learn from, and interact with the world wisely, choosing when and how to share their knowledge. Schopenhauer's philosophy highlights the paradox of intelligence. It is both a source of power and a source of suffering. While it grants clarity and independence, it also creates distance from those who prefer comforting illusions. Yet this distance does not have to lead to despair. Deep thinkers who learn to embrace their solitude, connect with those who understand them, and navigate the world with wisdom can find a sense of fulfillment that transcends the superficial happiness society offers. In the end, Schopenhauer's message is clear. Intelligence does not isolate people because it is wrong, but because it reveals truths that most would rather ignore. Society does not fear knowledge itself, it fears the disruption of the illusions that keep it comfortable. And deep thinkers, by their very nature, are destined to challenge those illusions, whether the world is ready for them or not. If you've ever felt isolated in your thoughts, understand this: you are not flawed. You simply perceive the world beyond its surface, seeing realities that others may never question. But does possessing a deep mind mean you are destined for solitude, or can you exist in society without compromising your intellectual depth? The truth is, society isn't structured to welcome deep thinkers. It is built to sustain equilibrium. Most people favor familiarity over discovery, which is why shallow conversations, popular trends, and simplified ideas dominate mainstream spaces. But why is comfort chosen over depth? Why does resistance emerge when new ideas challenge old systems, even if they bring progress? The answer is deeply rooted in the way human psychology functions and how societal institutions condition thought from an early age. The brain naturally seeks patterns, predictability, and ease of processing information. This is an evolutionary adaptation known as cognitive fluency, the tendency to favor what is simple and recognizable. When a thought is complex or unfamiliar, the brain instinctively perceives it as a challenge or even a threat. This is why people often defend outdated ideas. They resist uncertainty. System justification theory explains why individuals unconsciously protect the status quo, even when it works against them. Instead of questioning norms or rethinking ingrained beliefs, most choose to justify them, as change feels unsettling and disruptive. This attachment to familiarity is why societal progress is often met with resistance before eventual acceptance. Conformity plays a crucial role in shaping collective beliefs. The concept of groupthink illustrates how people would rather align with the majority than risk being isolated for dissenting views. This is why groundbreaking thinkers, innovators, and philosophers are often met with skepticism, if not outright hostility. Take a look at today's media landscape. Who dominates attention? Not intellectuals, but influencers who simplify complex ideas into catchy, emotionally charged soundbites. Deep conversations require patience and effort, whereas viral content thrives on instant gratification. Social media algorithms prioritize engagement, and nothing sparks engagement more than controversy, humor, or outrage, all of which overshadow rational discourse. The more an idea disrupts established beliefs, the more likely it is to be rejected in favor of something digestible. Echo chambers form as a result, reinforcing existing viewpoints rather than challenging them. This phenomenon is not limited to online spaces. It starts within the very institutions that mold our thinking: schools, workplaces, and governance. From a young age, education systems claim to promote intelligence, but in practice, they reward compliance over critical thinking. Students who memorize and conform are praised, while those who challenge authority or ask difficult questions are often dismissed. Similarly, the professional world does not necessarily elevate the most insightful minds. It favors those who maintain the existing power structure. In politics, leaders who appeal to emotions and affirm public biases often outperform those who introduce uncomfortable yet necessary truths. This pattern repeats throughout history. Visionaries are dismissed in their time, only to be revered when their insights are no longer disruptive. History provides countless examples of society rejecting brilliance before embracing it too late. Take Ignaz Semmelweis, who discovered the importance of hand hygiene in medicine, but was ridiculed by his peers. Today, his findings are fundamental to healthcare. Vincent van Gogh, one of the greatest painters in history, lived in poverty and obscurity, his genius only recognized after his death. Alan Turing, whose contributions to computer science were groundbreaking, was ostracized rather than celebrated in his lifetime. Society fears intelligence when it challenges norms, yet it glorifies it in retrospect once it is no longer seen as a threat. This cycle repeats because comfort will always be more palatable than truth, and deep thinkers will always stand at the edges of mainstream acceptance, waiting for the world to catch up. Throughout history, deep thinkers have often struggled to find acceptance. If you have ever felt isolated for seeing the world differently, know that you are not alone. Many of the greatest minds were not honored in their lifetimes. Instead, they were cast aside, ridiculed, or even punished for their insights. The world has always feared those who challenge the status quo, and the deeper one's thoughts, the more resistance they tend to face. Seekers who introduced revolutionary ideas were often seen as threats rather than visionaries, and their wisdom came at a cost. Yet, their ideas endured, shaping the future long after they were gone. Society, bound by tradition and comfort, often resists change, even when that change leads to progress. The rejection of deep thinkers is not a failure on their part, but a reflection of a world not yet ready to see beyond its own limitations. One example of such resistance is the story of Giordano Bruno. A brilliant philosopher and astronomer, Bruno expanded upon Copernicus's heliocentric theory, arguing that the universe was infinite and that countless other worlds existed beyond our own. His ideas challenged both scientific and religious doctrines of his time, making him a target. Instead of being recognized for his vision, he was imprisoned for years and ultimately burned at the stake. His death was a reminder of how fiercely society clings to familiar beliefs. Today, his work is seen as foundational in understanding the cosmos, yet he lived and died in a world that viewed his genius as heresy. This cycle repeats itself throughout history. Those who see beyond their time are often destroyed by the very world they seek to enlighten. Bruno's legacy, like many other deep thinkers, proves that truth does not die with those who first speak it. Consider the story of Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician who discovered that simply washing hands could prevent deadly infections. In the 19th century, hospitals were breeding grounds for disease, and doctors would go from autopsies to childbirth without cleaning their hands. Semmelweis noticed that women in maternity wards where doctors practiced poor hygiene were dying at alarming rates. He proposed that doctors wash their hands with a disinfectant solution, a simple practice that could have saved countless lives. Instead of being celebrated, he was mocked, ridiculed, and eventually dismissed from his position. His colleagues refused to accept that they were responsible for spreading disease. Unable to handle the rejection, Semmelweis suffered a mental breakdown and was institutionalized, where he died in obscurity. Decades later, his ideas became fundamental to modern medicine. His story reveals a painful truth. Even the simplest, most beneficial discoveries can be rejected if they contradict existing beliefs. Another example is Emily Dickinson, a poet whose work was too unconventional for her time. Unlike the grand, structured poetry that society admired, Dickinson's writing was deeply personal, often fragmented, and defied traditional form. She explored themes of death, nature, and eternity with an intensity that made many uncomfortable. Because of this, only a handful of her poems were published during her lifetime, and those that were published were heavily altered to fit conventional styles. Dickinson withdrew from the world, living in near isolation, continuing to write despite the lack of recognition. It was only after her death that her work was discovered and finally appreciated. Today, she is regarded as one of the most important poets in American literature, yet she never lived to see her impact. Her life exemplifies how society often fails to recognize genius in the present, only to revere it later when it is safe to do so. The same rejection happened to Nikolaus Otto, the inventor of the internal combustion engine, which became the foundation of modern transportation. Before the automobile revolutionized the world, Otto's ideas were dismissed as impractical. The dominant belief was that steam engines were the future, and no one saw value in a more compact, fuel-powered alternative. Financial struggles and legal battles followed him, as competitors tried to suppress his technology. Only years after his initial designs were stolen and adapted, did the world begin to see the brilliance of his work. His contributions laid the groundwork for the entire automotive industry, yet in his own time, he fought against disbelief and resistance. His story shows how innovation is often stifled by those who profit from the status quo, and how pioneers are frequently ignored or exploited before their work is acknowledged. Ada Lovelace was another visionary who was far ahead of her time. In the 1800s, she developed what is now considered the first algorithm, making her the world's first computer programmer. She worked alongside Charles Babbage on an early mechanical computing machine, predicting that computers could do far more than simple calculations. They could create music, process language, and even generate art. Her insights were revolutionary, but society was not ready to accept that a woman, or even a machine, could think in such complex ways. As a result, her work was largely forgotten until the modern computing era. Today, she is celebrated as a pioneer of computer science, but during her lifetime she was overshadowed and dismissed. Her story reflects how breakthroughs are often ignored simply because they come from unexpected sources, and how even the brightest minds can be silenced by societal biases. The rejection of deep thinkers is not just a thing of the past. Even in modern times, those who challenge established norms often face resistance. Whether in science, art, philosophy, or technology, the pattern remains the same. Society initially resists what it does not understand, only to later recognize the value of what it once rejected. Visionaries see beyond their time, and because of that, they struggle. But history proves that truth, once spoken, does not fade. It may take decades or even centuries, but eventually the world catches up. So if you ever feel misunderstood for thinking deeply, remember, you are in the company of those who shape the future. Society does not inherently fear intelligence, it fears the disruption it brings. Deep thinkers challenge norms, question traditions, and introduce perspectives that force change, and history has shown that change is rarely welcomed with open arms. But what does that mean for those who naturally think deeply? Does it mean isolation is inevitable? Not necessarily. It just means navigating the world with wisdom. Not every conversation is a space for profound insights, and not every individual is prepared to receive them. Instead of seeking validation from the masses, focus on finding those who value deep discussions. Whether through literature, philosophy groups, or digital forums, connections with like-minded individuals exist. It's about quality over quantity. The right minds will recognize yours. Throughout history, visionaries have mastered the art of making complex ideas digestible. Nikola Tesla envisioned technology decades ahead of his time, yet he struggled to gain recognition. Similarly, Leonardo da Vinci saw possibilities in art, science, and engineering that society took centuries to understand. True brilliance isn't just about having deep thoughts. It's about translating them in ways that make an impact. That doesn't mean diluting ideas, but rather refining them so they resonate. Some may resist, dismiss, or misunderstand, but that should never deter you. The world has always needed deep thinkers. It simply doesn't always acknowledge them right away. If you've ever felt like an outsider due to your thoughts, know that you are not alone. Many of history's greatest minds were once misunderstood, but the very ideas that were ridiculed often became the ones that reshaped the world. So embrace your depth, seek your tribe, and keep thinking beyond the surface. If this message speaks to you, let's discuss it in the comments. Have you ever faced resistance for your way of thinking? Share your story. And if you want to dive deeper into the wisdom of great minds, subscribe. We're just beginning this journey.